then I'm going to put us on Facebook, and then I'll turn it into I'll send it as an actual podcast later.
Sure.
People can watch it now, though. So let me go do that. It takes a second.
Sure.
A page I manage. And positively.
I would have no idea how to do that. So,
you just got to click a couple buttons. And right now Zoom is so overloaded that sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Now I promoted it, and then the university promoted it too. So there might be,
awesome.
There might be people watching. So I have to type some stuff. So hold on.
Okay, no problem.
I'm just copying the title you did for what was the publication?
Psychology Today. Yeah.
Psychology Today. So I'm just copying that title for now. Youth cope with, and I do want to spend some time talking about teens, because so much of my stuff is on littles, and I want to focus on. So
okay, sure.
And grown-ups too, if you can help with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Kelly, Kelly, right?
Yes.
From the University of Illinois. All right. Let me do this. And let me go live, and it'll tell me. All right, here we are. Hey, everybody on Facebook. It's James Shaw. We're on the Positively Dad Facebook page today for a special chance to watch the podcast before the podcast comes out, because we are definitely in different times, and we want to help everybody. And I'm really excited to bring back a guest who's been on the show before. But by the way, Dr. Tu, your episode that you did with me is like one of our top 10 most listened to. When you
That's
did
wonderful.
Dad, you're stressing me out. We talked about that one. So anyway, you're back. Dr. Kelly Tu, you're at the University of Illinois.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a little bit today about helping our families and our kids. And we'll talk some about teenagers really kind of cope with everything that's going on right now. So thank you so much for joining us again on Positively Dad. Yeah,
thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And so tell us just a little bit about you, what you do there at the University of Illinois, and what makes you such an expert to be able to help us today.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at the University of Illinois. My research focuses on how children cope with stress, typically day-to-day types of stressors such as social stress and academic challenges, how they're coping with it, and the role that parents play in helping children to develop effective coping strategies. So that's the main sort of premise of my research.
Well, and we need that right now. I mean, it feels like the last few weeks have just been wild, and they're going to be that way for a while, right? So the government says we're going to, we really need to keep social distancing until May, and many states have some sort of shutdown or stay at home or something like that. Our whole world's been changed. At the time that you and I are talking right now, Indiana has become the 11th state to cancel school for the rest of the year. You and I were talking about how you're teaching your college students right now. There's a lot going on, and it can be pretty stressful, can't it?
Yeah. When you're asking families to stay, when you're asking everyone to stay home, and especially thinking about families, whether they have teenagers or young kids who are also now doing remote learning and online learning, but then also for parents to still be working as well, if they are, fortunate enough to be able to continue working. And so that's sort of another layer of balancing, your work, your kids' schooling, the childcare, everything else that's going on. And then for some families, it's that added stress of being out of work, either having been laid off, a lot of different circumstances, and that's even more stressful. And so I think keeping that in mind and recognizing what families are going through right now, and it's a real wide range, but everyone is in very similar situations of being stressed in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, we're all going through different things. Today's April 2nd when we're talking. And so today the unemployment numbers came out over 6 million in 1 week, unemployment claims filed. There's just a lot going on. So let's start. Here's what I thought we could do. We could kind of start younger and work our way up. And then I want to talk about mom and dad too. So let's start with the younger kid. And you said really, first of all, we have to talk about what's going on because our kids know something's different happening.
Yes.
And you said the way we do that might depend on their age and interest.
Yeah. So in thinking about, the change and disruption to children's lives, they may have a lot of questions, and it's natural for them to have questions about what's going on. And I think for parents, they can be honest with them about what's happening, but taking into account, for younger kids, the way that they're going to explain things, not necessarily going into a whole lot of detail. There are germs going around, there's a virus, a lot of people are getting really sick. This is what we're trying to do to protect ourselves and our family, and to also keep other people healthy. And then for older kids, they may be asking more detailed questions, and even up to teenagers, they may be reading about, as news alerts are coming through or watching it on TV, and have a lot of questions about, what's happening, what this all means. And so taking that into account of what kind of information to provide. And one of the things I had suggested was, start with the most sort of basic, simple answer that you can, and then gauge the child or the teenager's responses from there and see, do they have more questions? Do they seem satisfied with the answer? And, maybe it's just a curiosity and now they can, they're moving on to something else. Or, do they have a lot more questions, and do they seem really worried about it? And what are ways to talk about what's happening in a way that can help them to manage some of those experiences and feelings that they're having?
Yeah, I think that one thing I've learned is just how roll with it kind of attitude, at least my 8-year-old has. Naomi is just, okay, this is what it is. And we've talked about it. And I think that the thing I've learned, and maybe you can comment on this, is she's a lot smarter than we think. So she, if I went and said, yeah, it's just a virus and we want to, stay safe from it, like I don't think that's a satisfying answer for her.
Yeah.
So how do we know if we need to go a little bit deeper with our younger kids?
Yeah, I think asking her directly, what kinds of questions do you have? Like, what do you want to know? Like, we've talked about this, but, what other questions might you have about it, to get a sense of what kind of information she's looking for before, going into detail about something that you think they might want to know. And it might be on base, it might be off base. So just doing that check-in with them to ask them about, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what kinds of questions they have.
I imagine different kids are going to need different things, right? That it's not a one size fits all. If your kid is 7, this is what you say. I mean, there's probably a lot of factors into to helping how much to say. So what's a good way to know how far you need to take it?
I think letting it be driven by the child. And I also think, thinking about different circumstances in terms of the child may have a family member who has been affected. And so they may have been hearing about these things. And so those conversations may be different and maybe more in detail, more in depth. They may be talking about it a bit more, as they may be concerned about that family member, or maybe it's a family friend, compared to a family who they don't know anyone who's directly affected. And the conversations around the pandemic and the virus are maybe a little different.
Okay, so you got to read your child and maybe let them lead the way. I think that's really good. Now, there's so much going on right now that is completely out of our control. And yet our whole lives have been thrown for crazy. And I heard somebody say one time, all right, let's, focus on the plan, not the problem. Let's focus on the things we do control, the things we don't. What's your advice on how to handle that? Because, I think Naomi's done a great job and I think my wife's done a great job of explaining why we're staying at home and we're not going out and playing with our friends. And yet our best friend lives across the street. Like they can see each other's bedrooms.
Yeah.
How do we handle what we can and can't control and really walk them through this?
Yeah, I think reminding our children what they can control and what they can do about it. And I think what you bring up is an important issue of, if we're trying to control something or some aspect of it that we have no control over, we're kind of running in circles, right? It's not really doing us any good. And so I think recognizing, this is what the situation is in terms of not being able to see our friends physically. We can't get very close. We can't do these things. But here's something that we can do instead. So things like, a lot of people are doing these like virtual play dates. being able to do video chats or make videos and exchange them, through either, depending on the age, like through their parents' devices or phones and those kinds of things, writing out letters, taking a picture of it, sending it that way, or even, trying to help text. And so I think thinking about other ideas and other ways for them to still have that social interaction with their friends, and thinking about this is something that they can do, and focusing more on that as opposed to what they can't do.
Well, and we might learn some new skills this way too. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing. We have allowed Naomi now to start to message. We found an app that's we can monitor everything.
Right.
And I understand there's stuff that opens, and yet we
Yeah.
can monitor everything and see what's happening. And what's been fun is that she's connected now with kids that she normally wouldn't. And she's getting to talk to her classmates. So you're saying, hey, let's focus on our ways we can connect and still be with each other and kind of support each other. And yet I think we probably have to explain why we're doing it this way.
Yes, I think you still have to explain it, but maybe more so the more time spent on here are ideas of what you can do, really emphasizing that. And then the other piece of it is like giving them the space to do that. So the example that you gave of letting your daughter start to message her friends, there's a lot, in terms of a lot of the, old rules that we had are kind of out the window now, in terms of, a lot of parents, if they have to get things done, being able to rely on some screen time for their kids. These are not ordinary times. And so we're taking very different approaches in terms of just how we're getting through the day. And so whether it's, okay, now our kids can use this app to message, we're using these other different kind of apps in order for them to connect with their friends. But what you're saying is that we're still able to monitor, maybe managing sort of the time spent on it, but still giving kids that space and a little bit of control over, how they want to interact with their friends and when they want to some degree. So they feel like they have a little bit more control over their lives.
Okay, yeah, that's good, because she would not have this app if it weren't for COVID.
Exactly.
The rules would still be there. And I didn't want it. And by the way, my wife was a genius to allow her to do it, because it's allowed her to connect.
Yeah.
Okay, now, we all used to have we get up at this time and we have breakfast and hurry up and put your shoes on, then we go to school and we can do this, and that's all out the window. And yet I think for their own well-being, getting some kind of schedule is pretty important, right?
Yeah, and so creating a new schedule or new routines, and it doesn't have to be as, strict or stringent as it was, when you had to get to the bus stop or you'd miss the bus and, the bell rings and that's the start of school. But a lot of people are saying having some definitive transition of knowing, and that's why people are encouraging, when your kids get up, they still get dressed. Although I will say my son does not, he prefers to stay in his pajamas and he's happy with that. So that's not something I want to fight right now. And so
Well, he's going to be at home for at least another month. So you've got time to figure it out.
Yes, exactly. But those like small things that help them to recognize like, oh, we're moving on to this. You can still have the like morning routine. You wake up, get dressed, brush your teeth, you have your breakfast. But whether or not you go straight into, okay, now we have to do schoolwork. And it's hard for a lot of kids to adjust. I think now that a lot of kids have been out for 3 or more weeks, we're starting to hear like, oh, I want to go back to school. I wish I could go back to school. Like, and so, for them, like the novelty of these extra, stay home days or break or whatever, it's wearing off. And so if you can develop or implement some routines for them to say, you can have conversations with them about it. How do you want to start your day? These are the things that we want to accomplish today, or these are our goals for today. We want to do a little bit of reading. We want to do a little bit of math. And I frame things for my son who is 6 around like activities. So not that this is like homework or schoolwork. We have this fun math activity that we're going to do. But again, giving them some sense of control and some say in their day and helping to shape like what that looks like, and having those conversations about, okay, so, during the morning, we'll, if the weather's nice, we'll go outside and, play for a little bit. And then after that, we're going to come in and do some of our math activities, our math work. And then so setting out the day in that way and sort of adjusting expectations of it's not going to be like typical school where they're there from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and every minute of every hour is packed with something. And that's what the teachers have said and communicated. That's what a lot of people are saying. We can't expect parents to now all of a sudden be, well-trained as teachers, primary, secondary education, and knowing how to teach some of this, these materials, and recognizing for parents, like, do the best you can. Try to keep it fun, and not as, not putting a lot of pressure on kids. And, if something's not working and you're getting a lot of pushback, take a break, come back to it later.
Yeah. I talked to somebody who said if your school day one day is frozen in the morning, lunch, and then frozen 2 in the afternoon, that's okay. I mean,
Yes.
we've got to give ourselves a little bit of grace. And what I'm hearing from you, though, is a routine is going to help our kids feel some sort of sense of normalcy during what you described as what you call unpredictable times.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's move the conversation forward. So let's move into the older kids, middle school, teenager, and so on, because this is a little bit different for them.
Right.
And you spent a lot of time in your Psychology Today piece talking about teenagers. So what are some of the things that we need to know as parents when it comes to helping our teens handle this?
Yeah, so I focused on one aspect in terms of this issue around social distancing, but I'll also talk about another piece that I didn't really address in that is also recognizing that this is really stressful and overwhelming for teens as well, preteens, teenagers, as well as young adults, in thinking about their future. They have more of that future orientation, whereas our young kids, they're really just thinking about today and maybe tomorrow, right? And so our teenagers are able to have more forward thinking about the future, and the academic demands that they have on them are different than what we have for our younger kids. And so there may be a lot of anxiety and distress around, how am I going to do all this? How am I going to learn, biology remotely? Or, how am I going to learn it just from reading a textbook? And so I think recognizing that there are also different kinds of challenges that teenagers might be experiencing, and thinking about how can we help to alleviate some of that pressure and that anxiety. And I think, again, going back to a lot of the kids from my research study that we've talked to, they talk about when it comes to their academics, they really want to make their mom and dads proud. And so I think and the parents may not realize, and they may not be doing it as a means of putting pressure. That's not their intention. But I think even for parents to be able to say, you know what, we're all trying to figure this out, and it's okay. It's okay to not feel great about or to feel stressed about, what your classes are going to look like. It's okay to struggle, and then offer, what can I do to help? What can we do to help? Whether or not parents can help to identify resources, or just let them know that, we can't have the same expectations right now that we normally would, and, that needs to change. And I think for some kids, hearing that might help to relieve some of the pressure of, I have to do my best, I have to understand this, my grades still matter, and I have to get, that A+ or whatever it might be. That could help to make a difference for those kids.
Well, and you and I did a whole episode that people should go back and listen to talk about how oftentimes when parents are engaging with our teenagers about things like school, that we can do more harm than good. And
Right.
So we did a whole episode on it. It's called Dad, You're Stressing Me Out. And it's fantastic. So you should go back and listen to it. And I feel like that the stuff we spent a half hour talking about last time can only become amplified right now, because now we have other stress. We're not seeing our friends. If we've got a boyfriend or girlfriend, we don't get to hang out with them. We're probably spending more time on social media, which may not be a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's all this more, plus you have to be with your parents all the time now
Right.
and have every meal with them. Like, I feel like that some of that's good, and it might
Right.
cause more stress, right?
Right. Yeah. And so, we can think about the silver lining of, more opportunities to, connect with family and, to make, positive memories out of a bad situation, bonding time. At the same time, thinking about, for adults and teenagers alike, recognizing that just because you're in the same space or you're in the same house, that doesn't mean you have to spend every minute together, and making sure that each person in the house can have their own space and their own time, like if they just need time away. So it's not that you have to do everything together. Recognizing, especially for teenagers, giving them that space to, do their own thing. Again, similar to children, being able to socially connect with their friends, whether it's through text messaging, the apps, social media, giving them space to get that support from their friends. Because in adolescence, friends are, really important, and that support from friends. And, even though we're all going through this together, it is something different about, okay, well, my mom and dad, like their perspective or their experiences, that's not what my friends would say. Like my friends get me, right? And they understand what I'm going through because they know the day to day. And so giving them that space and time to get that support from their friends, and for parents to recognize they don't have to be the sole source of support, that their kids have the social network, and giving them that space to tap into that.
Okay, I think that's fantastic. And then there was something you said in the article that really got my attention, and that was, parents, as you explain this to your kids, there's probably like an actual like biological reason as to why they don't get it. And you were talking just a little bit about brain development and that sort of thing. And this is
Yeah.
not to push off that, hey, kids need to understand things. It's just, it might take a little bit longer for teenagers to figure out why this is so important. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So what I talked about in the article, the focus on the teenagers part is, we've been seeing in the news recently, especially with young adults and teens, is not following these social distancing guidelines. So they're showing shots of, the Florida beaches, different parks where it's crowded with people, and especially in particular young people. And so, as I was watching that, and seeing seeing this coverage, I go back to, I also teach adolescent development, and understanding their brain development right now, in the sense of, the area of the brain that is involved in managing sort of decision making, future planning, the risk and reward assessments, that's not fully developed until about the mid-20s. And so when we're talking about our teenagers and our young adults, in this 15 to 25 age bracket, they're not thinking like adults because they're not adults, right? And so when they're in a situation of, I am going to miss out on this social opportunity. Everyone's going to be there. If I'm not there, that's going to be like the end of the world. I'm going to miss out on so many things. I have to be there. So the reward is really driving their behaviors of, I don't want to miss out. I don't, I want to be there with my friends. I want to experience everything that they're experiencing. The part of the brain that's processing the risk of coronavirus and, spreading it or getting infected, that is not at the forefront of what they're thinking. What they're thinking about is these missed social opportunities. And so I think understanding that's where the teens and the young adults, their mindsets might be, to understand. So one of the things I talked about in the article is, not all young people are out, not socially distancing. And so I think it's important for friends to talk about that. So, encouraging their friends to participate in social distancing and saying like, hey, like I'm doing it, and explaining their reasons why. And I think if that can start a trend, that can sort of spread through their network. And again, thinking about if peers can have and friends can have a strong influence on risky behaviors, they can also have a very similar influence on positive, healthy behaviors as well. And so
Yeah.
if you have enough friends who are saying like, oh no, like I'm not going out, we're not meeting up for this, that could have a positive impact.
That definitely carries some influence for them. And then what about, so if parents want to help explain this to just alleviate whatever, why won't you let me go out or whatever might come? What's a good way for a parent to help a teenager understand this is why we have to stay home? I mean, it almost seems like we're going to have the same conversation with our 18-year-old as our 8-year-old.
Yeah. And I think that's very important. And I will say, I don't feel like I have a good answer in that regard in thinking about understanding where the mindset is and where teenagers are coming from in terms of their decision making. I think a lot of it has to do with not necessarily playing up the risk, but playing up the reward of staying in. So I think it's thinking about it in a different way. And it's even hard for me as I think about, when I taught my adolescent development class, and I talked with the students about, like how can we have these conversations about risky behaviors such as like substance use or drinking and driving and those types of things. And so I don't have a good answer for that, except when it comes to thinking about playing up the reward of engaging in the safer, healthier choice, and not necessarily because they may brush it off, right? If you're saying like, well, now it's like hundreds of, thousands of people are infected, hundreds of people are dying. For some that may resonate with them, but for others it may not. And so it's thinking about how you're framing the message and not necessarily playing that piece up, but playing the other side of it up as this is a rewarding part of it in terms of thinking about risk and reward. But yeah, continuing to, eventually they'll get that message, but just being consistent about the message and, and if they're, at home with them, really monitoring those behaviors and having strict guidelines about those things. Here's what you can do. You can, FaceTime or video chat, but you're not going over to so-and-so's house.
And as a parent, you're going to have to deal with that. And eventually you'll make some progress is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's two kind of other things I wanted to talk about. And I appreciate you doing this for us today. It's been so helpful. Anytime there's change in life, we don't like change, we resist it, and we've been forced into it. This was not voluntary, and we've all been forced into this change. So it does bring up, and you talked about it earlier, some anxiety, stress. What are some ways we can tell if our kids are experiencing anxiety and stress, and how can we help them?
Yeah, so I think it's monitoring sort of their behavior, their demeanor. Are they acting or behaving differently than they normally do? Whether it's either acting out more, sort of being disruptive or defiant, or if they're like really quiet and withdrawn, they don't really want to talk to anyone or, really engage with anyone at home. Those would be some signs of, maybe something's going on here, and let me check this out. Let me as a parent continue to check in and offering those opportunities and just saying, hey, like I'm here, offering your support and availability, and just doing those daily check-ins with them to say, I'm here if you want to talk about it, or, even thinking about, maybe they're not ready to talk about it. Maybe they're processing things on their own. So the talking about that might be one strategy. Another could just be just distraction. For a young child, for a teenager, now that we're all sort of stuck at home, thinking about this disruption to our lives, what are some things that we can do that can help us to not be on our phones, seeing these updates, not watching TV, but, what is something that we can do either as a family or, some of us in the family that can just help to take our minds off of what we're going through right now. And, whether it's doing a family game afternoon instead of a family game night, or going out for a walk, any of those, so just something different to break up sort of what the mood might be or the monotony of the day, just
Yeah.
trying something different to distract them.
I have a feeling, Dr. Tu, that we're going to go through this, for a period of time. And then as life starts to move in a more traditional way, that we'll have to go through this change again and deal with like the frustration again. Right now we got to go I don't want to drive to work anymore. I don't want.
Yeah.
So we could see this again. Okay.
Yeah.
Last thing I wanted to ask you about is this.
Yeah.
There's parents are experiencing stress too.
Yes.
And like I said, so today, I know if you're watching live on Facebook, it's April 2nd. By the time this podcast comes out, it won't be April 2nd. It's going to be after that. And so the numbers I give might be wrong. I mean, we're up to 9 million jobs lost in 2 weeks, and hours being pulled back, and stock markets going crazy. And now you didn't intend to have your kids home with you. And now in at least 11 states, they're going to be home until the fall. Parents are experiencing some stress too. What do you want to say to them to kind of have some, I guess, pay attention to some self-care on this?
Right. I think that's really important in recognizing, parents, you're doing your best, whatever it is that you might be doing, because these are really unprecedented times, and we haven't experienced this kind of sort of shutdown before. And so just recognizing that you're doing your best and not putting extra pressure on yourselves to, now I have to be this perfect like stay-at-home parent that like does all of the, homeschooling and doing all these things for my kids, and just really what are realistic expectations. Yes, there are a number of kids now who are out until the fall, and there are these remote online learnings, but that's not to say you have to become an expert in being a kindergarten, first grade, second grade, whatever teacher, being there if you can to support your kids, but not necessarily, no one's expecting parents to like, now I have to learn all this content and teach it. If you are getting that message, I would say you shouldn't put that pressure and that expectation on yourself, and just try to take things sort of one day at a time. So for parents who have lost their jobs, you were talking about the unemployment rate, there are a lot of stressors and worries that come with, what's happening next. I do think there are a lot of things that are being put in place to help protect these vulnerable families in terms of, extended, deadlines or due dates for different things. And so, being able to recognize that I think people are seeing this, and we really want to make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable population as well. And that prior to this, these families were already in really challenging and stressful circumstances. And so just to take things a day at a time at this point is, I think, the best that we can do. And just to make sure to take time for yourself. It is really hard, whether you're working, you're still working from home, or whether you have been laid off. And if you have children at home, trying to balance everything. And, especially with younger children, there's a lot of time, effort, and energy in terms of childcare, but making sure to take time for yourself, to find a way to, decompress, to de-stress. And then one of the, a really important thing is to get some sleep, get some rest. And I know that might be hard with all of the things that are changing, and, there might be a lot of stress and anxiety about what's going to happen, down the road. But I think trying to think about, let's take it a day at a time, and, break it down into more manageable pieces, and making sure that we're trying to do things to help ourselves to take care of ourselves. So I think things like meditation apps, a lot of them are now providing like free content. And so if that's something that will help you to sort of de-stress and to help you sleep and to get that rest, because, it's kind of like when you go on a flight, right? They say, put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. And so for parents especially, it's really easy to sort of burn out and say, no, I have to take care of all these things. And I'm guilty of that. And so I know, even for myself, like I need to take care of myself to be able to take care of my family. And so making sure to build in that time for yourself.
That's great. Well, Dr. Two, you've been a great guest for us, so thank you so much. I know you're on Twitter now. This is very exciting. So if people want to follow you on Twitter, how can they find you?
It's Kelly M24.
Kelly M24. And then I'm going to share the Psychology Today piece on our Facebook page,
Okay.
so if people want to read it,
Thank
they
you.
can. Thank you so much for being on the show again. I appreciate it. You've added a lot of value.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed talking with you.
All right, we're off Facebook. Thank you. That was so
Okay.
good, and I appreciate it. Was that your son who was coming in there? That was so fun.
Oh yeah, did you see him? I was
I
trying
heard
to.
him. I didn't see him. It's
Okay.
okay. It's, you
Yeah.
know what? It's April 2020. Everybody's kid needs to pop up in the Zoom.
I know. Yeah, so he just woke up from his nap. Dad was trying to get him, you know, a snack. So I have a 6-year-old and I have a 22-month-old.
Oh my goodness. That's so fun. Well, best of luck to you.
Yeah.
Thanks again for doing this for me.
Yeah, sure.
And
No problem.
stay safe there in Illinois, okay?
Thank you. You too.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.